Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 238, Alcohol in Moderation, What the Current Guidelines and Research Actually Say. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. I'm Shelly Rael, registered dietitian nutritionist, and this week's episode is talking about alcohol. And specifically, what moderation actually means, what the most recent dietary guidelines say about alcohol consumption, and what the research has been showing over the past several years. Now, this is one of those topics that seems simple on the surface for anybody who's ever paid attention to these recommendations, or more specifically, these guidelines. And you may have heard the recommendations or guidelines before. That's 1 drink per day for women, 2 drinks per day for men. And that's been the standard messaging for quite a long time. But I want to clear up a few things because some of the wording comes out not in the way I'd like it to be. So it makes it sound like when we say recommendations, it's for some people hear that word recommendation is like we're telling people they should be doing this, when really I say this is the guideline or it is the recommendation for those who choose to drink and what that means. And the other part is that 1 drink per day or those 2 drinks per day, that's not something where I'm telling people you need to have a drink every day. It's more of, if you're doing this, this is what we recommend the limit should be, and it is a use it or lose it situation. So I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I just want to say this. When we say 1 drink per day for women, that means no more, again, the recommendation or the limit should be no more than 1 drink per day for women. And when I say use it or lose it, that doesn't mean come Friday or Saturday to have 3, 4, 5 because you haven't had a drink all week. So I'm going to get into some more of the details here, but I just want to make that part clear because when I first started teaching about this years back, it didn't occur to me that some people had this idea of, oh, they could save it up for the weekend, or, that I'm saying 1 drink per day, that, oh, you have to have a drink every single day. So no, and no. So I'm going to go into, again, more of the details here when we look a little bit more closely. What does the research say? And it's not as straightforward. And that recently, with these newer dietary guidelines, the 2025-2030 guidelines, there was some different messaging there. So I'm going to start there, but I just want to do a quick rundown that this is another episode addressing the dietary guidelines and some of the nuances that are within those. So an episode of the history of the dietary guidelines when they first started as far back as 1980 and what has stayed the same. Another episode about what has changed over these last 40 plus years of the dietary guidelines. And then last week's episode was specifically about the 2025-2030 guidelines, what they got right and where they fell short. And then I'll just mention this, that I've done a few episodes about alcohol in my podcast series, this whole lifetime of this podcast, with the most recent one being episode 131, and that was 2 years ago in April of 2024. Now, I'm not going to link to that episode because it was talking about alcohol and health, and this episode talks about what has been or what has changed or what we now better understand about alcohol and our health. Now, with those other 3 episodes about the dietary guidelines, those are linked in the show notes. You can also find them in the podcast feed. And then with this episode, I have 2 blogs that I wrote recently about this topic, and both of those are linked in the show notes if you want to read about both of those. All right, so first up, what changed in the dietary guidelines in the most recent version of the dietary guidelines? So in previous versions of the dietary guidelines for Americans, alcohol intake was defined, with a specific number, with specific numbers. So adults of legal drinking age could choose not to drink, of course, seems obvious. They could choose to drink in moderation, and that's where that definition of up to 1 drink per day for women, up to 2 drinks per day for men, on days when alcohol was consumed. So again, when alcohol was consumed. And that was outlined in every version of the dietary guidelines for Americans with that 1 drink or 2 drinks per day. And this most recent version of the guidelines, released in January 2026, shifted the language. So instead of giving specific numeric limits and what that meant, the recommendation is now to, quote, consume less alcohol for better health. So consume less alcohol for better health. What does consume less alcohol mean? And this is a noted change. As I said, every version before this has had specifications there. So this change moves away from that clearly defined limit and towards a more general recommendation to reduce overall intake, I should say. And at the same time, the guidelines still say that some individuals should not drink at all. So let me talk about who should not drink at all. And again, I'm saying should. Nobody's I should say, I won't slap a drink out of your hand. Maybe some people will. But this includes pregnant individuals. So during pregnancy, there is no safe limit or no safe amount. Those recovering from alcohol use disorder, those taking medications that interact with alcohol, and individuals with certain medical conditions. I'm not going to go into all of that in this episode. So even though with these most recent version of the guidelines, those specific numbers are gone, the message is still there. Less is better. And for some people, none is the safest and best choice. So I want to talk about more of the messaging and why this changed. Although with the most recent guidelines, I don't know why the messaging changed to be more vague. But I do want to address what some of the messaging has changed as it relates to what research has been showing. And I have had people question this before. Why is a dietitian talking about alcohol? Well, people consume it. It contains calories that can affect our nutrition and our overall health. So it has been part of our conversation for a long time. And for years, and this I'm sure will not go away in people's mind, I should say, there's been discussion about potential benefits, especially for heart health. So what most people parrot back to me or say back to me is the idea that a glass of wine is good for your heart. You've probably heard that. And more recent research has challenged that idea. So some of those earlier studies that suggested benefits were observational. And when it was looked more closely at the groups of people, it was association. And what was more identified and more likely is when researchers looked more carefully for other factors besides alcohol consumption, things like income, access to healthcare, overall diet, and lifestyle habits. The benefits of alcohol consumption alone was much less clear. So now we're left with what is now a different understanding, that if there's any cardiovascular benefit, it's small. And for many individuals, the risk of consuming alcohol doesn't justify the benefits, the potential benefits. So let's talk more about alcohol and the health risks. And a lot of people are surprised when they learn this, but one of the most important points here, one of the most important factors here is that alcohol is classified as a group 1 carcinogen. That means it is a known human carcinogen in the same category, I should say, as tobacco and asbestos. And I want to make this clear because somebody asked me one time, what's a carcinogen? Carcinogen is a substance known to cause cancer. So alcohol is a known carcinogen in the sense we know alcohol can cause cancer in the same category as tobacco and asbestos. Alcohol is associated with increased risk of several cancers, including breast cancer, colorectal cancer, liver cancer, esophageal, and head and neck cancers. So head and neck cancers could be tongue, throat, mouth cancers. And this is where some of these little details come in here. So The risk of cancer is dose dependent, meaning higher intake over time increases risk. If somebody has one drink in their entire life, that doesn't mean it's a dead giveaway or an absolute that they're going to get cancer. It's the more alcohol that is consumed can increase the risk of various types of cancer. Just like one cigarette is not going to give you lung cancer, or walking through a building that has asbestos in it is not going to give you lung cancer. Smoking multiple cigarettes over years, packs a day over years, increases risk significantly, same as working directly with asbestos. So again, this doesn't mean that one drink is going to lead to disease. It does mean that the idea of alcohol being a completely safe substance to consume and that there's a completely safe level is less certain than what we once thought. So going back to that one drink per day or up to one drink for women, up to 2 drinks for men, this is where some things get overlooked or assumed. So what actually counts as one drink? So the definition of a standard drink is something that contains 0.6 fluid ounces of pure alcohol. So we are not, regardless of what we're drinking, none of us are consuming pure alcohol. So 0.6 fluid ounces of pure alcohol. So what does that look like in real world situations? So a 12-ounce beer that is 5% alcohol by volume, or ABV, that has 0.6 fluid ounces of pure alcohol in it. So it's diluted within that. So a 12-ounce beer, 5% ABV. 5 ounces of wine that is about 12% alcohol by volume. Or this is 1.5 ounces or a shot of distilled spirits. That's about 40% ABV or 80 proof. So those are what is defined as that one drink. And this is a reference point because here's the issue. Most drinks do not match those exact amounts. Often people are having a pint of beer, so 16 ounces, not 12. Some beers have higher alcohol content. I know people who specifically look for the higher alcohol content in the beers that they choose when they're out at a brew pub. More bang for their buck. A glass of wine at home or even in a restaurant, 5 ounces, no, we'd think we'd be ripped off. So it's closer to 6 or even 8 ounces, not 5. Cocktails, that 1.5 ounce shot. Some cocktails contain more than one shot of alcohol, especially when there's mixed with other ingredients. So some drinks or cocktails have more than one alcohol in it, and it can be 2 ounces, 2.5, 3 ounces in one drink. So what one drink is defined as versus what we actually consume may actually be 2 or more. So this is one of the biggest gaps between the guidelines on paper and real life application. So understanding the difference matters more than memorizing the numbers. So if you're enjoying a glass of wine with friends when you're out or about or at home, and how many glasses are you having? It's not so much how many glasses are you having, it's how many ounces are you having overall. So thinking of a standard bottle of wine, that should be 4 glasses. And some people are like, oh, you're kidding, right? I get 3. So again, it's not to say you have to, change or count. Just think of this. But the other part here is what's important to consider is what happens in the body. When you drink alcohol, when a human being drinks alcohol, it's absorbed quickly through the stomach and the small intestine and enters the bloodstream directly, which with food and other things, it has to go through a process and goes to the liver and gets distributed by the liver. Alcohol just is a straight shot to the front of the line there. And from there, as the bloodstream does, it travels or takes things throughout the body. Now, the liver's responsible for metabolizing most of the alcohol, and it does it at a fairly steady rate. So this one standard drink that we talk about, it takes the liver about 1 hour to metabolize that standard drink. So It can vary through individuals, by individuals, but when we're talking about that 1 or 2 drinks per day, that's based on that idea that our liver takes an hour to metabolize that 1 drink. So if people are consuming 3 drinks in a matter of a couple hours, the body's still working on that first drink that first hour and the second drink the next hour. So it takes that time. 3 drinks, the 3 drink equivalent would take 3 hours minimum for the body to metabolize it. And while alcohol is present, so when we consume alcohol, even if we're consuming other things at the same time, the liver prioritizes breaking it down. That's why I say alcohol is not only the VIP front of the line, it pushes its way to the front of the line like a pretentious jerk and says, I'm here first. So other processes of metabolizing things take a back seat. That's food. That's also when we talk about not mixing medications or drugs with alcohol, because alcohol will take priority over that and it can affect our metabolism of certain medications. So this can affect how our body handles all of that stuff. And here's the other part. Alcohol reaches the brain quickly. Even 1 drink can affect judgment, reaction time, and decision making. And that's why even low levels of alcohol, can impair driving or other activities that require focus. Now, if people push back on that, like, I feel fine after a couple of drinks. Okay, but that's not how the body is responding to it. And that's part of our brain and the effects of alcohol saying, I feel fine. Reaction time can be slower. So what happens when we have more than 1 drink? I kind of started with this already, but when intake increases beyond the 1 drink in a short period, the body just can't keep up the same pace. Our blood alcohol concentration rises. That's what the BAC is, blood alcohol concentration. So you may see the slower reaction time, reduced coordination, increased risk-taking behavior, and impaired memory. And then at a higher level, alcohol can affect breathing, heart rate, and body temperature regulation. So these are things when people have binge episodes or high consumption, breathing becomes slower and people can stop breathing. Heart rate can slow down. Body temperature regulation. People can feel warm. And that's sometimes when people are intoxicated, they take off their clothing because they feel warm when in fact they're not. They just feel warm and they can get hypothermia. But the short-term risk of alcohol consumption, of these higher alcohol intake, is risk. The risk of injury, the risk of accidents, the risk of acute health events. That would be, brain health issues or heart issues. So I say this a lot. This is where the pattern of drinking matters. Having several drinks in one sitting is not the same as spreading them out over time. So where you're having several drinks in a single episode. I think of vacations. People tend to drink more on vacations. But it could be on a weekend or for a ball game or for something. Several in one setting. It's not the same. That's why we say that 1 drink equivalent or 2 drink equivalent over the course of a week or a day. So that way over the course of a week, we have different health risks. Well, let's talk long-term, because the long-term effects of alcohol can vary from person to person. And our long-term effects are influenced by a lot of things, as with most things in nutrition. It's influenced by genetics, our body composition, our sex, frequency and amount of intake, and our overall diet, lifestyle, medication use, underlying health conditions. There's a lot that influences what's going to happen with long-term alcohol use. And I mentioned in there briefly sex. This is where a lot of people don't get this. So there are 2 recommendations, one for men, one for women. And that's based on birth sex. And it is not because of body size or body composition. It's a genetic, or I should say, a difference between male versus female. Because if we had 2 people, a man and a woman who are both 150 pounds, Why does one still get more than the other? It's not based on that. It's based on women having less of an enzyme that metabolizes alcohol. So it takes women longer to metabolize alcohol. That's why there's the two recommendations. And you can call discrimination all you want. Go ahead and I tell people you can do what you want. It's just based on that specific reasoning there. So let's talk about the long-term effects here. As I said, all those things contribute to what influences those long-term effects. But the consistent patterns here, alcohol increases cancer risk. It can raise blood pressure and contribute to certain heart conditions. It can lead to changes in liver health over time. It affects brain function, both short-term and long-term, including memory and cognition. And it can also impact sleep quality. Even if it seems to help with falling asleep, it disrupts sleep. It has where people fall asleep quickly, but it's not a restful sleep. All right, so who should not drink? As I said some of that earlier, there are certain groups where the recommendation is clear, no alcohol. So individuals who are pregnant or trying to become pregnant, alcohol crosses the placenta quickly, and there is no known safe level of drinking during pregnancy. No alcohol includes individuals recovering from alcohol use disorder or those who have difficulty controlling their intake. People taking medications that interact with alcohol, which is quite common. As I mentioned, the liver prioritizes alcohol, and so it can cause our medications to not work as effectively if it's not being metabolized in the time frame that it should be. And then individuals with certain medical conditions, there's just so many medical conditions. It's more of, know your medical conditions and what alcohol recommendations are related to those specifically. And then here's the other thing. For those with a family history of alcohol use disorder, awareness is important. I know people who have a strong family history of alcohol use disorder, they choose not to drink, while others are aware of it, but they still choose to drink. That's personal choice. Risk, as we understand it, is influenced by both genetics and our environment. So here's this thing. If you choose to drink, there's no reason to increase risk, or I should say increase intake for this potential health benefits. If you choose to include alcohol, understand what a standard drink looks like to help you get an idea of what you're consuming. Pay attention to those portion sizes. So that's not saying you have to decline the 16-ounce beer. It's keeping in mind that that is 1.25 servings of alcohol. Avoid saving multiple drinks for one occasion. Consider how alcohol fits into your overall health, including how it affects your sleep, what medications you're taking, and your long-term risk as an individual. And if you do not drink, I don't know why you're still here, but hey, there's no reason to start. There is in the past, people have said, oh, should I start drinking? I'm like, are you going to? No? Okay, then no. Nobody's telling anybody to start drinking. And actually, the trend now is fewer people are choosing to drink. A couple more things here about alcohol, calories and metabolism here. Alcohol provides 7 calories per gram. So that's more than carbohydrates, more than protein, and closer to the calorie per gram as fat. So these calories do provide energy. So alcohol provides energy in the form of calories, but it does not contain nutrients, meaning we can live without it. There's not going to be any issues. And as I said, because the body prioritizes metabolizing alcohol, it can interfere with other metabolic processes. That's part of the reason when people have fatty liver is because fat is accumulating around the liver because it's causing a backlog and a traffic jam, so to speak, and it's not being metabolized. Over time, that fatty liver, or the interfering of metabolic processes, I should say, can contribute to changes in our body composition and our liver health. So here's the bottom line. Going back to the dietary guidelines for 2025-2030, the guidelines are reflecting a broader understanding of alcohol and health, and it doesn't mean every individual must avoid it completely. But I also want to take into consideration this. What does choosing less alcohol mean for an individual? That's such a vague thing to say. Choose to drink less. If you're not drinking anything, again, don't start. But consider where you are now. What might be less for you? It may not be much. It may be a lot. But I want to make it clear, we do not know of any clearly safe threshold for alcohol consumption. And so it's not as certain as we once thought that any amount is okay. We actually say any amount might be okay, but less is better. So what you're consuming now, if any, less is better. Alcohol is common in social settings. It's part of cultural traditions, but it is not required for health. It isn't. And it does carry measurable risk. So understand what's in your glass or in your hand, how your body responds to it, how your habits fit into your overall health. That's what matters more. And this is about being informed, not judgment. I know I'm throwing out a lot of these things. That's why I have the links in the show notes for those 2 blogs. What does all this look like? And maybe think about, do you really need to think about maybe having a little bit less? If you have questions about this, certainly reach out. Let me know what you might want to have a discussion about, and I'm fine with that. And I just want to thank you for being here, staying all the way to the end of this episode. This is one of those topics that can be complex. People have very strong thoughts about this, and I just want you to just sit with it and see if you found this information helpful. I'd appreciate a review on wherever you're listening to this. Share it with somebody who might be interested in this. I do want to say quickly, it is not your job to have an intervention for somebody or tell them they're drinking too much. Unless this is your profession, that's just left to professionals to talk to people about their alcohol consumption. So with that, I just want to say have a great weekend as this comes out on Fridays, or have a great week ahead. I will see you next time. I will speak to you next time. So take care and bye for now.